Hello and welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to start the chapter on the age of conflict circa 1000 to 1200 AD. The period from 1000 to 1200 saw rapid changes both in West and Central Asia and in the North India. It was these developments which led to the incursion of the Turks into northern India, leading to their rule towards the end of the period. By the end of the ninth century, the Abbasid Caliphate was in decline. Its place was taken by a series of states ruled by Islamized Turks. The Turks had entered the Abbasid Empire during the ninth century as palace guards and mercenary soldiers. Soon they emerged as the kingmakers. As the power of central government declined, provincial governments started assuming independent status. So, those for some time the fiction of unity was kept up by the Caliph, formally granting the title of Amir ul Umra, commander of the commanders, on generals who were able to carve out a separate spheres of authority. These new rulers assumed the title of Amir at first and of Sultan later on. The continuous incursion of the Turkish tribesmen from Central Asia, the mercenary character of the Turkish soldiers who were prepared to switch loyalties and abandon an unsuccessful ruler without much thought, the strife between different Muslim sects and between different regions made the period a restless one. So this was a very restless period in terms of the different rulers and the incursion of the Turkish tribesmen because since the Turkish tribesmen were basically the palace guards and the mercenary soldiers in the Abbasid empires, which soon became to a level of the kingmakers. Basically, they were given the titles of Amir or Urmra or the commander of commanders for the generals who were capable of carving out separate spheres and asserted their authority. Later on, these new rulers assumed the title of Amir at first and then Sultan. So there was a tumultuous situation because the Turkish soldiers were prepared to switch loyalties and abandon an unsuccessful rulers without giving a further thought. So this would lead into many strifes. Also, there was different strifes between Muslim sects and different regions, because of which there was a restless period. Empires and states rose and fell in rapid succession. In this situation, only a bold warrior and leader of men, a person who was adept in warfare and in withstanding intrigues, could come to surface. The Turkish tribesmen brought with them the habit of ruthless plunder. Their main mode of warfare consisted of rapid advance and retreat, lightning raids, and attacking any loose body of stranglers. They could do this because of the excellent quality of their horses, as also their hardihood, so that they could cover incredible distances on horseback. Meanwhile, the breakup of the Gurjara-Pratihara Empire led to a phase of political uncertainty in North India and a new phase of struggle for domination. As a result, little attention was paid to the emergence of aggressive expansionist Turkish states on the northwestern border of India and in West Asia. Kabul, Kandahar, and its neighboring area to the south called Zabul or Zamindawar were considered parts of Al-Hind or India till the end of the ninth century. There were many Buddhist and Hindu shrines in the area, the most important being the 53.5-meter colossal statue of Buddha at Bamiyan, with caves for residence of 1,000 monks. The area up to the river Oxus was ruled by many dynasties, some of them claiming descent from Kanishka. These kingdoms, backed by a mixed population of local tribes, Hunas, Turks, exiled Iranians, and Indians such as Bharti Rajputs, offered stiff resistance to the Arab effort to enter the area for tribute, plunder, and slaves. Consequently, there was continuous skirmishing on both sides of the border. The Ghaznavids. Towards the end of the ninth century, Transoxiana, Khorasan, and parts of Iran were being ruled by the Samanids, who were the Iranians by descent. The Samanids had to battle continually with the non-Muslim Turkish tribesmen on their northern and eastern frontiers. It was during this struggle that a new type of soldier, the Ghazi, was born. The battle against the Turks, most of whom worshipped the forces of nature and were heathens in the eyes of the Muslims, was a struggle for religion as well as for the safety of the state. So there were most of them who worshipped the forces of nature and were heathens in the eyes of the Muslims. Hence, the Ghazi was a missionary as a fighter because he was trying to protect his religion. There was a struggle for religion as well as for the safety of the state. So Ghazi can be termed as somebody who was a missionary as well as a fighter. He acted as a loose auxiliary of the regular armies and made up his pay by plunder. It was the resourcefulness of the Ghazi and his willingness to undergo great privations for the sake of the cause which enabled these infant Muslim states to hold their own against the heathen Turks. In course of time, many Turks became Muslims, but the struggle against renewed incursions of the non-Muslim Turkish tribes continued. So basically, the Turks were not a prominent Muslim population because there were many who were non-Muslims, Turkish tribesmen, and they worshipped the nature and were heathens in the eyes of the Muslims. So because of that, a troop of Ghazis emerged who were basically can be called the missionaries or the fighters. In due course of time, many Turks became Muslims, but the struggle against renewed incursions of the non-Muslim tribesmen Turks continued. The Islamized Turkish tribes were to emerge as the greatest defenders and crusaders of Islam. So these were not Islamic by origin. They became Muslims later on, but the Islamized Turkish tribes were to emerge as the greatest defenders and crusaders of Islam. But the love of plunder went side by side with defense of Islam. Among the Samanid governors was a Turkish slave, Abd who in course of time established an independent kingdom with its capital at Ghazni. The Samarkand kingdom soon ended and the Ghaznavids took over the task of defending the Islamic lands from the Central Asian tribesmen. It was in this context that Mahmud ascended the throne in 1998 to 1030 at Ghazni. Mahmud is considered a hero of Islam by medieval Muslim historians because of his stout defense against the Central Asian Turkish tribal invaders. The Ghazi spirit therefore further increased during his reign. Secondly, Mahmud was closely associated with the renaissance of the Iranian spirit, which grew rapidly during the period. The proud Iranians had never accepted the Arabic language and culture. The Samarkand state had also encouraged the Persian language and literature. A high watermark in the Iranian Renaissance was reached with Firdausi's Shahnameh. Firdausi was the poet laureate at the court of Mahmud. He transported the struggle between Iran and Turan to mythical times and glorified the ancient Iranian heroes. There was a resurgence of Iran patriotism, and Persian language and culture became the language and culture of the Ghaznavid Empire, so much so that Mahmud himself claimed descent from the legendary Iranian king Afrasiab. Thus the Turks became not only Islamized but Persianized. It was this culture that they were to bring with them to India 2 centuries later. While Mahmud played an important role in the defense of the Islamic states against the Turkish tribes and in the Iranian cultural renaissance, in India his memory is only that of a plunderer and a destroyer of the temples. Mahmud is said to have made 17 raids into India. The initial raids were directed against the Hindu Shahi rulers who at that time held Peshawar and Punjab. Their capital was at Udbanda or Hind, Peshawar. The Hindu Shahi rulers had been quick to see the danger of the rise of an aggressive expansionist state on their southwestern border. The Hindu Shahi ruler Jayapal had, in alliance with the displaced Samanid governor of Ghazni, the Bhatti ruler of the area around Multan, and the Amir of the Multan invaded Ghazni. But he had to suffer a defeat, and the coalition between built by him collapsed. In retaliation, the Ghaznavid ruler of the time laid waste the area up to Kabul and Jalalabad. In about 990 to 91, under Sabuk Tigin, the Shahi suffered serious defeat. Following this, the provinces of Kabul and Jalalabad were annexed to Ghazni. As a prince, Mahmud had taken part in these battles after his accession to the throne. He resumed the offensive against the Shahis. The Shahi ruler Jaipal had in the meantime strengthened his position by bringing Lahore under his control. Thus the Shahi rule extended from Peshawar to Punjab. In a furious battle near Peshawar in uh, 1001, Jaipal was again defeated. Mahmud advanced to the Shahi capital and thoroughly ravaged it. Peace was made by ceding the territory west of the Indus to Mahmud. Soon after, Jaipal died and was succeeded by his son Anandpal. According to some later accounts, Jaipal had entered a funeral pyre following his defeat because he felt he had disgraced himself. The story that he had been taken prisoner by Mahmud and then released seems doubtful. Despite these setbacks, Shahis were still strong enough to offer serious resistance to Mahmud's efforts to penetrate into Punjab. Mahmud also had to counter the attack of non-Muslims, Turks from Central Asia. However, in a decisive battle near Indus in 1009, Anandpal was defeated and Mahmud devastated his new capital, Nandana, in the Salt Ranges and overran his fort called Nagarkot, wrongly confused with Nagarkot in Himachal, which Mahmud never reached. Anandpal was allowed for some time to rule from Lahore as a feudatory, but in 1015 Mahmud advanced up to Lahore, plundered it, and ousted Anandpal. Soon Ghaznavid territories extended up to the river Jhelum. Earlier, the Muslim kingdom of Multan had also been overrun. However, an attack on Kashmir by Mahmud in 1015 was foiled due to weather conditions. Thus, the struggle against the Shahis was a prolonged one, and the Shahis put up stout resistance. In this struggle, the Shahis were supported only by the Muslim rulers of Multan, who had been harassed by slave taking raids from Ghazni and belonged to a sect which Mahmud considered heretical and hence an enemy. It is noteworthy that apparently none of the Rajput rulers came to the aid of the Shahis. Although, in order to exaggerate the scale of Mahmud's victory, the 17th century historian Ferishta mentions that many Rajput rulers, including those from Delhi, Ajmer, and Kannauj, aided Jaipal in 1001. However, Ajmer had not been found by then, and Delhi or Dhilika was a small state. Likewise, the Gurjara Patiharas of Kannauj, whose sway had extended upon Thanesar at one time, were in a much weakened condition, thus the Shahis fought virtually alone. In 1015, Mahmud was poised for an attack on the Indo-Gangetic Valley. During the next half a dozen years, Mahmud launched a series of expeditions into the Indo-Gangetic plains. These raids were aimed at plundering the rich temples and towns which had amassed wealth over generations. The plundering of this wealth also enabled him to continue his struggle against his enemies in Central Asia. He also did not want to give time to the princes in India to regroup and to combine against him. Mahmud's raids into India alternated with battles in Central Asia. For his plundering raids into India, the Ghazis came handy to him. Mahmud also posed as a great but shikhan or destroyer of the images for the glory of Islam. Mahmud also posed as a great but shikhan or destroyer of the images for the glory of Islam. From the Punjab, Mahmud raided Thanesar, the old capital of Harsha. His most daring raids, however, were against Kannauj in 1018 and against Somnath in Gujarat in 1025. In the campaign against Kannauj, he sacked and plundered both Mathura and Kannauj. The following year, he invaded Kalinjar in Bundelkhand and returned loaded with fabulous riches. He was able to do so all this with impunity due to the fact that no strong state existed in North India at that time. No attempt was made by the Mahmud to annex any of these states between 1020 and 2025. Between 1020 and 1025, Mahmud was engaged in Central Asian affairs. In 1025, he made a plan for raiding Somnath, which had a fabulously rich temple and attracted lakhs of pilgrims. It was also a rich port. The objective was to create a sense of awe and shock among the Rajputs because he marched via Multan and Jaisalmer with a regular cavalry of 30,000. Meeting light opposition on the way he reached Somnath, the commander of the city fled at his approach, but the citizens put up a stout resistance. Mahmud broke the Shivalingam and ordered parts of it brought back with him to Ghazni. So he was literally a plunderer, and the commander of the city of Somnath actually fled, and it was the people who led the stout resistance against Mahmud. However, he broke the shivling and ordered that the parts of it should be brought with him to Ghazni, evading the attempt of some Rajput rulers to block him on his way back. He had to counter the marauding bands of Jats in Sindh. He returned to Ghazni loaded with immense wealth. It is difficult to say whether Mahmud's attack on Somnath presaged an attack on Rajasthan and Gujarat. Mahmud returned the following year to punish the Jats who had harried him on his return to Ghazni. He died at Ghazni in 1030. It was not correct to dismiss Mahmud as just a raider and blunderer. The Ghaznavid conquest of the Punjab and Multan completely changed the political situation in North India. The Turks had crossed the chain of mountains defending India in the northwest and could make a deeper incursion into the Gangetic heartland at any time. The reason why they were not able to extend their conquest into the area for the next 150 years was due to the rapid changes which took place in the Central Asia as well as in North India during the period. Following the death of Mahmud, a powerful empire, the the Seljuk Empire came into being. The Seljuk Empire included Syria, Iran, and Transoxania, and contended with the Ghaznavids for the control of Khorasan. In the famous battle, Masood, the son of Mahmud, was completely defeated and had to flee to Lahore for refuge. The Ghaznavid Empire now shrank to Ghazni and the Punjab. Although the Ghaznavids continued to make plundering raids into the Gangetic Valley and Rajputana, they were no longer in a position to pose a serious military danger to India. Simultaneously, a number of new states arose in North India which could counter the Ghaznavid raids, the Rajput states. The rise of a new section called the Rajputs and the controversy about their origin have already been mentioned. With the breakup of the Pratihara Empire, a number of Rajput states came into existence in North India. The most important of these were the Gahadwalas of Kannauj, the Paramars of Malwa, and the Chauhans of Ajmer. There were other smaller dynasties in different parts of the country, such as the Kalachuris in the area around modern Jabalpur, the Chandelas in Bundelkhand, Chalukyas in Gujarat, and Tomars of Delhi. Bengal remained under the control of the Palas and later under the Senas. The Gahadwalas of Kannauj gradually squeezed the Palas out of Bihar. At its height, the Gahadwar kingdom extended from Mongir in Bihar to Delhi. The greatest ruler in the dynasty was Govind Chandra, who ruled in the first half of the 12th century. He made Kannauj his capital, with Banaras remaining a second capital. Persian sources of the time called Govind Chandra the greatest ruler of Hindustan. The Gahadwaris are reputed to be the biggest defenders against the continued Ghaznavid raids into the Doab. Govind Chandra was succeeded by Jai Chandra, who had to contend with the rising power of the Chauhans, and it is said that it was because of Jack Chand that there was a treachery, uh, and because of which Prithviraj Chauhan, the ruler, a greatest ruler of the Chauhans, had to die. The Chauhans who had served under the rulers of Gujarat established their capital at Nadol. Towards the end of the 10th century, the greatest ruler in the dynasty was perhaps Vigra Vigraha Raj, who captured Chittor and established Ajmeru, and made it his capital. He built a Sanskrit college at Ajmer and the Anasagir lake there. Like the Gherbars, Chauhans too offered stout resistance to the Ghaznavid raids. Vigraha Raj captured Delhi, Dilika from the Tomars in 1115, but allowed them to rule it as feudatories. Vigraha Raj also came into conflict with the Paramars of Malwa, where the most famous ruler known as the legend was Bhoj. Both Vigraha Raj and Bhoj were patrons of poets and scholars. Vigraha Raj himself wrote a Sanskrit drama. Bhoj had to fight his neighbors to the north as well as to the south. He is credited with writing books on philosophy, poetics, yoga, and medicine. The most famous among the Chauhan rulers was Prithviraj III, who ascended the throne at the young age of 11 in or about 1177, but took the reins of administration in his hand when he was 16. He immediately embarked on a vigorous policy of expansion and brought many of the smaller Rajput states under his sway. However, he was not successful in his struggle against the Chalukyan ruler of Gujarat. Now, this forced him to move towards the Ganga Valley. He led an expedition in Bundelkhand against its capital Mahoba. It was in this struggle that the famous warrior Alha and Udal lost their lives. So Alha and Udal are said to be from Maihar, which is a small hill town in Satna district of Madhya Pradesh. And these were the famous warriors who lost their lives during an expedition by Prithviraj Chauhan. The Chandel rulers of Mahoba is said to have been supported in this struggle by Jai Chandra of Kannauj. So Jai Chandra of Kannauj was basically a rival of Prithviraj Chauhan. The Ghedwars had also contested the attempts of Chauhan to control Delhi and Punjab. It was these rivals which made it impossible for the Rajput rulers to join hands to oust the Ghaznavids from Punjab. So these Rajput rulers were basically on a perpetual struggle within themselves, and this made them short-sighted, and they could not see Ghaznavids coming there with their expansionist policies and plunders and raids. The basis of Rajput society was the clan. Every clan traced its descent from a common ancestor, real or imaginary. The clans generally dominated a compact territory. Sometimes these settlements were based on units of 12 or 24 or 48 or 84 villages. The chief would allot lands in the villages to his sub chiefs, who in turn would allot it to different Rajput warriors for the maintenance of their family and the horses. Attachment to land, family, and honor, man, was a characteristic of the Rajputs. So the general characteristics or the attributes of Rajputs was the attachment to their land, their family, and honor, which is the man. Each Rajput state was supposed to be ruled over by a Rana or Rawat in conjunction with his chiefs, who were generally his blood brothers. Though their fiefs were supposed to be held at the pleasure of the ruler, the Rajput notion of sanctity of land did not permit their resumption by the rulers except in special circumstances such as rebellion, absence of hire, etc. The Rajput organization of society had both advantages and disadvantages. One advantage was a sense of brotherhood and egalitarianism which prevailed amongst the Rajputs. But the same trait made it difficult to maintain discipline amongst them. Feuds, which continued for several generations, were another weakness of the Rajputs. But their basic weakness was their tendency to form exclusive groups, each claiming superiority over the others. They were not prepared to extend the sense of brotherhoods to non Rajputs. This led to a growing gap between the Rajput ruling groups and the people, most of whom were non-Rajputs. The Rajputs form only about 10% of the population in Rajasthan even today. The proportion of the Rajputs to the rural proportion of the areas they dominated could not have been much higher during the 11th and 12th centuries. The Rajputs treated war as a sport. This and struggle for land and cattle led to continuous warfare among the various Rajput states. The ideal ruler was one who led out his armies after celebrating the Dussehra festival to invade territories of his neighbors. So the ideal ruler was the one who led out his armies after celebrating the Dussehra festival to invade the territories of his neighbors. The people, both in villages and the cities, suffered the most from this policy. Most of the Rajput rulers of the time were champions of Hinduism, though some of them also patronized Jainism. They gave rich donations and grant of lands to Brahmanas and temples. The Rajput rulers stood forth as protectors of the privileges of the Brahmanas and of the caste systems. The system of charging a lower rate of land revenue for Brahmanas continued in some Rajput states till their merger in the Indian Union. So, this tradition of charging low rates of interest or the low rates of land revenue from the Brahmanas, this tradition continued till the merger of the Indian Union. In return for these and other concessions, the Brahmanas were prepared to recognize the Rajputs as descendants of the old lunar and solar families of the Kshatriyas, which were believed to have become extinct. The period after the 8th century, and particularly between the 10th and 15th century, may be regarded as marking a climax in temple building activity in North India. Some of the most magnificent temples that we have today can be traced back to this period. The style of temple construction which came to prominence was called the Nagara. Though found almost all over India, the main centers of construction in this style were in North India and in the Deccan. Its main characteristic feature was the tall, curved spiral roof over the Garbhagriha or the deity room Deul. The main room was generally a square through projections could be made from each of its sides. An anteroom mandap was added to the sanctum sanctorum, and sometimes the temple was enclosed by high walls which had hefty which had lofty gates. The most representative temples of this type are the group of temples at Khajuraho in Madhya Pradesh and at Bhubaneswar in Odisha. The Paraswanath temple, the Vishwanath temple, and the Kandarya Mahadev temple at Khajuraho illustrate this style in its richest and most finest form. So these are the three permanent temples at Khajuraho, which are Parashvanath temple, Vishwanath temple, and Kandarya Mahadev temple, which represent the Nagara style of architecture in its most rich and fine form. The rich and elaborate carvings on the walls of the temple show that the art of sculpture had attained its height. Most of these temples were built by the Chandelas, who ruled the area from the beginning of the 9th to the end of the 13th century. In Orissa, the most magnificent temple of time architecture, magnificent examples of temple architecture of the time are the Lingaraj temple built in 11th century and the Sun temple of Konark built in 13th century. The famous Jagannath temple at Puri also belongs to this period. A large number of temples were built at various other places in North India, Mathura, Banaras, Dilwara, Abu, etc. Like the temples in South India, temples in North India also extended to become more and more elaborate. They were the centers of social and cultural life. Some of them, such as the temple of Somnath, became extremely wealthy. They ruled over many villages and took part in business activities. In addition to temples, the Rajput rulers also built many fine palaces, powerful forts, and works of public benefit such as stepped wells, bawelis, bunds, etc. The Rajput rulers also patronized arts and letters. Many books and plays were written in Sanskrit during the period under their patronage. Vastupal, the famous minister of the Chalukyan ruler Bhima in Gujarat, was a writer and a patron of scholars and the builder of the beautiful Jain temple of Mount Abu. So Vastupal was a famous minister of the Chalukyan ruler Bhima in Gujarat and was the writer and patron of scholars and the builder of the beautiful Jaina temple at Mount Abu. It was Vastupal, and he was a minister in the Chalukyan dynasty. Ujjain and Dhara. Ujjain and Dhara, the capitals of Parma rulers, it was maybe basically called as Dhar, I guess, were famous centers for Sanskrit learning. Many works were written in Apabhramsha and Prakrit, which represented the languages of the region. The Jain scholars made significant contributions in this direction, the most famous among them being Chandra, who wrote books in Sanskrit, and Apabhramsha. With the revival of Brahmanism, Sanskrit supplanted Apabhramsha and Prakrit among the upper classes. However, literature in these languages, which were near to the spoken languages, continued to be produced. The modern North Indian languages such as Hindi, Bengali, and Marathi began to emerge out of these popular languages during this period. So here we have a map of around 1200 AD where we could see the Chauhanas in the northwest, We have the Chalukyas of Gujarat, the Chandelas in central India or Malwa. We have the Chalukyas in the south. We have the Senas in the eastern India, the Gahadwals uh, in North India. And we can see the state of Ghazni over here, the northwest frontier of India. So, with this, we have come to an end to this video, and we would have a resumption of this chapter in the next video. Till then, see ya. Bye.